Under the cold stars of the north, where ancient pines whisper secrets of the old gods, a story of vengeance and magic unfolds. When raiders torched the great Mead hall, they left behind only ashes, bones, and a single surviving boy. But fate had other plans. The last forest witch, keeper of forbidden rune magic and guardian of sacred groves, found him crying among the embers. She took him into the depths of her enchanted realm, teaching him both the warrior's way and the ancient arts. As the seasons turned, he grew strong in blade and spell, carrying the weight of two worlds upon his shoulders, the blood debt of his murdered kin and the mystic legacy of his adopted mother. But can one who walks between worlds truly unite them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The night air carried the scent of roasted boar and honeyed mead when young Bjorn first noticed something was wrong. The usual laughter and song that filled his father's great hall had grown quiet, too quiet. Through gaps in the wooden walls, he caught glimpses of shadows moving against the starlit snow, shadows that shouldn't have been there. His father's broken war horn lay silent in the snow, its bronze surface reflecting the first flickers of flame. Later, Bjorn would remember how his mother's fingers had trembled as she pressed her silver brooch into his palm, pushing him toward the hidden door behind the tapestry. "Run," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing chaos. "Run to the forest, little bear." The raiders came like wolves in the night, their axes gleaming in the torchlight. Grimwulf the Ruthless led them, a giant of a man whose laugh cut through the screams like a blade through flesh. His beard was braided with bones, and his eyes held the cold light of winter's cruelest moon. Bjorn watched from his hiding place as the great wooden beams of his home began to burn. The heat was intense, but the cold in his heart was deeper. Through tears that froze on his cheeks, he saw his uncle fall first, then his older cousin Eric. His father's voice boomed above the chaos, calling commands until a spear took him in the throat. The silver brooch grew hot in Bjorn's grip as he pressed himself against the frozen earth behind a snowbank. The metal began to melt and warp in the intense heat of the burning hall, but he couldn't let go. It was all he had left of them now. Grimwulf's men moved methodically, ensuring none escaped the inferno. They checked the perimeter, their boots crunching in the blood-stained snow, mere feet from where Bjorn lay hidden. One raider passed so close that Bjorn could smell the sour. Mead, on his breath, could see the crude tattoos that marked him as one of the Crow clan, rivals from across the fjord who had long coveted his father's prosperous lands. The great hall's mighty timbers groaned and crashed inward, sending a cascade of sparks toward the star-filled sky. Each spark seemed to carry with it a memory: his mother's songs, his father's lessons in swordplay, the warm embrace of family. During the long winter nights, all of it turning to ash in the cruel winter wind, as the raiders celebrated their victory with stolen mead and crude jests, Bjorn began to crawl backward, inch by painful inch, toward the tree line. The forest had always seemed forbidden and dark, but now it offered his only hope of survival. The ancient pines reached for him like shadowy fingers, promising either shelter or doom. He was too numb to care which. His world had been reduced to this: the half-melted brooch clutched in his frozen fingers, the taste of ash and tears on his tongue, and the terrible knowledge that he was now utterly alone. The mighty hall that had sheltered generations of his family was now their funeral pyre, painting the night sky with an unholy glow. A wolf howled in the distance, and for a moment, Bjorn thought he saw something moving in the shadows between the trees, something that walked like neither man nor beast. But fear of the unknown forest could not match the horror of what lay behind him, and so he pressed on, deeper into the darkness, leaving behind the only world he had ever known. As he ventured further into the forest's embrace, the sounds of the raiders' revelry grew fainter, replaced by the whisper of wind through ancient branches and the soft crunch of snow beneath his feet. The trees seemed to lean in around him, their branches forming a protective canopy that blocked both the bitter wind and the sight of his burning home. The silver brooch had cooled and hardened in his grip, its shape forever altered by the heat of the fire, just as Bjorn himself had been transformed by this night. He tucked it into his tunic, close to his heart, where it would remain as a constant reminder of all he had lost, and all he would one day avenge. Dawn found Bjorn huddled beneath a great pine, his clothes stiff with frozen tears and ash. The forest had grown strange around him during the night. The trees seemed closer together than nature should allow, their branches intertwining overhead like gnarled fingers. Mist curled around their trunks, carrying whispers he almost understood. He might have died there, another victim of winter's cruel embrace, had the witch not found him. She emerged from the mist like a figure from the old tales his grandmother used to tell, tall and straight-backed, despite her years, with silver hair that caught the weak morning light. In her right hand, she carried a staff of ancient yew, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. "Well now," she said, her voice as deep and rich as honey left to age in oak. "What manner of small warrior has winter brought to my doorstep?" She knelt before him, and Bjorn caught the scent of herbs and wood smoke. Her eyes were the color of spring leaves, bright with an intelligence that reminded him painfully of his mother. "They're all gone," Bjorn managed to whisper, his voice cracking. "The raiders, Grimulf, they burned everything." His fingers clutched at the misshapen brooch beneath his tunic, its edges cutting into his palm. The witch's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. "Grimulf!" She spat the name like a curse. "That one has long since forgotten the old ways, the ancient pacts between men and forest." She studied Bjorn's face for a long moment, then held out her hand. "Come, child. These woods are no place for the unprepared, and you look half frozen already." Bjorn hesitated. His father had warned against trusting strange women in the woods, but his father was gone now, gone with everything else he had ever known. The witch waited patiently, her hand steady. Finally, driven by cold and exhaustion, Bjorn took it. She led him through the mist, which seemed to part before her like a curtain. The staff in her other hand occasionally struck the earth, and each time it did, Bjorn felt a subtle tremor through the ground beneath his feet. The trees appeared to bow as she passed, their branches lifting to clear her path. They came at last to a massive oak tree, its trunk wider than any Bjorn had ever seen. As they approached, he realized that what he had taken for natural formations in the bark were actually carefully carved steps leading up to a dwelling built seamlessly into the tree's enormous bulk. "Welcome," the witch said, "to my humble home. I am Greta, though some call me the last forest witch." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her ancient eyes. "Though I suspect there are others, hiding in their own corners of the wild places." Inside, the tree home was warm and filled with fascinating items. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the gnarled ceiling beams. Shelves carved directly into the living wood held clay jars of all sizes, their surfaces marked with more of those shifting symbols. A fire burned in a hearth that seemed to have grown naturally in the heart of the tree, its smoke disappearing into hidden channels above. Greta sat Bjorn by the fire and wrapped him in a blanket that smelled of pine needles and summer sunshine. She pressed a cup of something warm into his hands, tea that tasted of honey and herbs he couldn't name. As warmth slowly returned to his limbs, she listened to his story, her face growing grimmer with each detail. "The old magics grow weaker," she said when he had finished, "and men like Grimulf take advantage of that weakness. They forget that these lands were once kept in balance by those who understood both blade and spell." She rose and took her staff from where it rested against the wall. In the firelight, Bjorn could see that the runes carved into its surface were protection symbols, some like those his grandmother had sewn into his winter clothes, others strange and ancient. "You have a choice before you, young Bjorn," Greta said solemnly. "I can guide you to the nearest settlement of your people, where you might grow up to be a fine warrior like your father." She paused, studying his face. "Or you can stay here, with me and learn the ways that your ancestors knew, the path of both blade and spell. It will not be an easy road, but it might give you the means to prevent others from suffering as you have suffered." Bjorn's hand found the brooch again, its twisted surface a reminder of all that had been taken from him. He thought of his father's strength, his mother's wisdom, and the stories his grandmother told of a time when warriors worked hand in hand with those who kept the old magics. "I want to learn," he said, his voice stronger now. "I want to learn everything." Greta nodded, satisfaction and something like sadness mixing in her expression. "Then rest now, little bear," she said, using his mother's endearment, though he hadn't told her of it. "Tomorrow we begin." As Bjorn drifted into an exhausted sleep, he watched the firelight play across the witch's staff, where she had propped it near his bed. The runes seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat, and for the first time since the raid, he felt something close to safe. His last thought before sleep took him was that perhaps he wasn't so alone after all. Spring came to the forest, and with it, Bjorn's first lessons. Greta proved to be a demanding teacher, though her methods were unlike anything he had known before. Where his father had started his warrior training with wooden swords, Greta began with a simple river stone, smooth and grey as winter clouds. "Before you can wield power," she told him, sitting cross-legged in her herb garden, "you must understand its cost." She placed the stone in his palm. "Look closely. What do you see?" Bjorn turned the stone in his hands. "Nothing. It's just a stone." Greta's smile held secrets. "Look deeper. Not with your eyes, with that part of you that dreams, that remembers, that knows things you've never been taught." Days passed as Bjorn struggled with this first lesson. He spent hours staring at the stone until his eyes watered, growing increasingly frustrated. Then one morning, as dawn painted the forest in shades of gold, he saw it, tiny marks, like scratches that formed patterns across the stone's surface. They shifted and changed as he watched, telling stories of ancient rivers and patient time. "Now you begin to see," Greta said, noting his widened eyes. "These are the oldest runes, written by nature itself. All our magic begins here, with learning to read what already exists." She took out a piece of charcoal and began to teach him the basic runes, showing how they echoed the natural patterns he had discovered. The lessons that followed tested both mind and body. In the mornings, Greta taught him the warrior's arts, but with a difference. "Your father taught you to stand like an oak," she observed, correcting his stance, "but sometimes it is better to bend like a willow." She demonstrated moves that flowed like water, turning an attacker's strength against them. In the afternoons, they studied runes. Bjorn learned to carve them into his practice stone, each mark requiring perfect precision. A badly drawn rune, Greta warned, is like a poorly aimed sword, dangerous to friend and foe alike. She taught him how combinations of runes could create powerful effects, but always emphasized restraint. Magic, like a blade, requires respect. Use it carelessly, and it will turn on you. The first time Bjorn successfully activated a rune, he had been practicing late into the evening. The protection symbol he'd carved glowed faintly blue in the gathering darkness, creating a small circle of warmth against the night's chill. His cry of triumph brought Greta running, worry turning to pride when she saw what he'd accomplished. "Well done, little bear," she said, using his mother's old endearment as she sometimes did in moments of approval. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Power without wisdom is like a sword without a scabbard." As summer deepened, Bjorn's education expanded. He learned to listen to the forest's whispers, to read the messages carried by wind and birdsong. Greta taught him how different woods held different magics. Oak for strength, rowan for protection, yew for speaking with the spirits of the land. His stone, now covered in practice runes, became a constant companion. "Your father's people weren't always strangers to magic," Greta told him one evening as they sat by her hearth. "There was a time when every warrior understood at least the basic runes, when every sword carried blessings carved into its blade. But men like Grimulf," she spat the name as she always did, They chose to forget, thinking it would make them stronger. Bjorn thought of his grandmother then, of the protection, symbols she used to sew into their clothes. Perhaps some of the old knowledge had survived after all, hidden in plain sight, passed down through the women of his clan, while the men turned away from it. The hardest lesson came when Greta taught him about balance. "The forest gives us power," she explained, "but it must be repaid. Every spell cast creates a debt that must be settled." She showed him how to offer thanks, a drop of blood for major workings, or small gifts of food and drink for minor magics. This is why the old ways were abandoned by many. They wanted the power without the responsibility. One morning, after Bjorn had successfully combined 3 runes to create a shield of magical force, Greta brought out a wooden box he had never seen before. Inside, nestled in a bed of moss, lay a collection of small stones, similar to his practice one, each carved with a single perfect rune. "These are your first real tools," she said solemnly. "Each one took me days to prepare, and they carry magics far stronger than what you've worked with before. Use them wisely." She picked up one marked with the rune for insight. "Remember, true power lies not in knowing when to use magic, but in knowing when not to." That night, as Bjorn lay in his bed in the treehouse, he held his original practice stone and thought about how far he had come. The crude marks of his first attempts were still visible beneath the newer, more confident runes. Like the twisted silver brooch he still kept close, it was a reminder of his journey, of endings and beginnings, of loss and learning. Outside his window, the forest whispered its ancient secrets, and now, finally, he was beginning to understand its words. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, but for the first time since the raid, Bjorn felt truly ready to face them. He was no longer just the son of a fallen chieftain. He was becoming something else, something that bridged 2 worlds. In his dreams that night, he saw himself wielding both sword and spell, and the forest itself rose up behind him like an army of ancient gods. The bronze bell hung from a low branch of Greta's oak, its surface green with age and marked with spiraling runes that caught the morning light. It had been there since Bjorn's arrival, but he had never seen it ring until today. "The old ways are not just about runes and spells," Greta said, reaching for the bell. "They're about maintaining the balance between our world and others." Her fingers traced the ancient markings. This bell was forged in a time when the barriers between worlds were thinner, when spirits walked freely among men. The sound it made when she rang it was unlike anything Bjorn had heard before, not a clear ring, but a complex harmony that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. The forest grew still, holding its breath. Then slowly the air began to shimmer. They appeared like morning mist taking form, the spirits of the forest. Some wore shapes that nearly matched the creatures Bjorn knew, foxes with too many tails, deer with branches for antlers. Others defied description, being little more than suggestions of movement and intent. Their eyes, when they had them, held ancient wisdom and wild magic. "These are the true keepers of the forest," Greta explained softly. "Our allies, if we respect them. Our doom, if we abuse their trust." A spirit that looked like a child made of autumn leaves danced closer, curious about Bjorn. They remember everything. The raids, the broken promises, the slow retreat of magic from the world of men. Bjorn stood very still as the leaf child circled him, its movements making a sound like his mother's skirts rustling across the great hall's floor. The memory brought tears to his eyes, and the spirit reached out to touch one as it fell, turning it to a perfect crystal that rang like the bell when it hit the ground. "They know your story," Greta continued. "They saw you that night, guided you toward my grove." She smiled at his surprised look. "Did you think it was mere chance that brought you to my door? The spirits remember when your father's people honored the old pacts. They hope, perhaps, that through you those bonds might be renewed." Over the weeks that followed, Bjorn learned the complex protocol of dealing with the forest spirits. Each type had its own preferences, its own rules of engagement. The leaf children were playful but easily offended. The branch walkers, who moved through the canopy like squirrels made of shadow and starlight, were serious and formal. The wisest and most dangerous were the old ones, who appeared as nothing more than distortions in the air, but whose power could reshape the forest itself. "Never promise what you cannot give," Greta warned him. "The spirits do not understand lies or half-truths. A broken oath to them is worse than any crime among men." She taught him the proper offerings: honey for the leaf children, fresh water for the branch walkers, and silence, pure and complete, for the old ones. The spirit bell became a regular and part of Bjorn's training. Each ring summoned different spirits, depending on how it was struck and which runes were touched while ringing. He learned their names, not the kind that could be spoken with a human tongue, but the kind that could be understood through gesture and intent. Sometimes, in the deep of night, Bjorn would hear the bell ring on its own, marking the passage of spirits on errands he could only guess at. The sound would mingle with his dreams, bringing visions of ancient forests and battles long forgotten, of a time when magic ran as deep as the roots of the world. One morning, after a night of such dreams, Bjorn found a gift waiting beneath the bell, a small pouch made of leaves that never withered, inside which lay 3 perfect acorns. "The spirits have accepted you," Greta said, her voice thick with emotion. "These are seeds from the first oak, the tree from which all others grew. Plant them only in times of greatest need." The gift came with responsibility. The spirits began to bring him news of the forest's troubles, places where the balance was disturbed, boundaries that needed reinforcing. Under Greta's guidance, Bjorn learned to address these issues, combining his growing magical skills with the practical knowledge of his warrior training. "This is what it means to walk the old ways," Greta told him as they worked to heal a poisoned stream. "Not just power, but service. Not just knowledge, but understanding." She watched as Bjorn used his rune stones to draw the poison from the water while singing the soft, strange songs that called water spirits to help with the cleansing. The spirit bell rang of its own accord when they finished, a sound of approval that echoed through the trees. The spirits gathered to witness their work, their presence making the air thick with magic. The leaf child who had first welcomed Bjorn now brought him a crown woven of living moss and tiny flowers, a symbol of acceptance that made Greta's eyes shine with pride. That night, as Bjorn lay in his bed listening to the spirit bell's occasional chimes, he realized how far he had come from the terrified boy who had fled into these woods. The forest that had once seemed dark and threatening was now a second home, its spirits as much his family as the one he had lost. He touched the twisted silver brooch he still kept near his heart, feeling how its surface had been smoothed by years of handling. The pain of his loss would never fully fade, but it had been transformed, like the brooch itself, into something new. He was learning to be both warrior and witch, to bridge the world of men and spirits, to heal old wounds and forge new bonds. The spirit bell rang once more, soft and clear in the darkness, and Bjorn smiled, understanding now that it had been calling him home all along. The dreams always began the same way: firelight on snow, the crack of burning timber, his mother's final whispered words. But lately they had changed. In these new dreams, Bjorn stood taller, stronger, watching his younger self flee into the forest. The twisted silver brooch burned against his chest, and in his hand he held a fragment of steel that sang with both memory and magic. He woke one morning, sheets tangled around him, to find Greta standing in his doorway. "It's time," she said simply. "Get dressed, bring your runestones." She turned and descended the trunk stairs without further explanation, leaving Bjorn to hurriedly prepare himself. They walked for hours through the morning mist, deeper into the forest than Bjorn had ever ventured. The spirits watched their passage. He could feel their attention, like sunshine through leaves. Finally, they reached a clearing he recognized from his nightmares, the place where he had first entered the forest that terrible night. "Some lessons can only be learned by facing our fears," Greta said softly. She produced a cloth-wrapped bundle from her robes. "The spirits brought this to me 3 nights ago. They've been waiting for you to be ready." Inside the bundle lay a broken piece of sword blade, its surface dark with old blood and newer rust. But even damaged and dirty, Bjorn recognized the pattern-welded steel, the distinctive wave-like markings his father's swordsmith had been famous for. His hands trembled as he lifted it. "Your father's blade," Greta confirmed. "The spirits kept it safe, knowing one day you would need it." She watched as Bjorn's fingers traced the broken edge. "But it's more than just steel now. It has been tempered by death and magic, by grief and memory. It wants to teach you something." Following her instructions, Bjorn placed his runestones in a circle and set the sword fragment in their center. The morning light caught the ancient steel, and suddenly he was falling into memory, not just his own, but the blade's as well. He saw his father receiving the sword on his own coming-of-age day, saw it drinking first blood in battles against raiders and rivals. He felt the years of training, the weight of responsibility, the countless times it had been drawn in defense of home and family. And finally, he experienced its last moments, the desperate clash against Grimolf's men, the final stroke that broke it, his father's death. But there was more. The blade had lain in the snow as the hall burned, had absorbed the magic of that terrible night. The spirits had found it there, recognized its importance, and hidden it away until the right moment. Now it thrummed with potential, waiting to be reforged into something new. "Blood remembers," Greta said, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Steel remembers. Magic remembers. Everything that has happened becomes part of what will be." She knelt beside him, adding her own runes to the circle. "Show me what you've learned." Drawing on all his training, Bjorn began to work. He used his runes to cleanse the blade of rust and old blood, but not the memories they carried. He sang the spirit songs Greta had taught him, calling on the forest's magic to help him understand what the sword fragment wanted to become. The work took hours, the sun climbing high and then beginning to descend. Bjorn's voice grew hoarse from singing, his fingers cramped from tracing runes, but he didn't stop. This was more than just a lesson. It was a bridge between his past and future, between the warrior he'd been born to be and the witch he was becoming. As dusk approached, the blade began to change. The pattern-welded surface rippled like water, the old steel accepting the magic he worked into it. Runes appeared along its length, not carved but emerging from within the metal itself, ancient symbols of protection and power that Bjorn recognized from his studies. "Blood magic," Greta observed, her voice heavy with approval and warning. "The oldest kind, born of sacrifice and memory. Use it wisely, little bear. Such power always demands payment." When the work was finally done, Bjorn held up the transformed blade fragment. It was shorter than before, more like a long knife than a sword, but it hummed with contained power. The runes along its surface shifted in the failing light, responding to his touch, to his blood, to the magic he had learned to wield. "A weapon for one who walks between worlds," Greta said approvingly. "Neither purely sword nor purely spell, but something new." She helped him to his feet. His legs had grown stiff from kneeling so long. "Your father would be proud, I think, not just of your strength, but of your wisdom in finding a new path." That night, back in his bed in Greta's oak, Bjorn lay awake. For a long time, the transformed blade fragment beside him. His dreams, when they finally came, were different. He still saw the burning hall, still felt the heat of that terrible night. But now he also saw the spirits moving through the flames, saw the magic that ran like roots through the world. He saw himself as he was becoming, not just his father's son, but something more. The blade fragment seemed to pulse gently in the darkness, its runes glowing faintly with an inner light. It was a reminder that some things broken could be remade, that endings could become beginnings. Bjorn touched the twisted brooch that still hung around his neck, feeling how it resonated with the magic in the reforged blade. Together they were pieces of his past, transformed by power and purpose, just as he himself was being transformed. Outside, the forest whispered its ancient secrets, and now he understood them better than ever. He was learning to be both warrior and witch, to carry both blade and spell. The path ahead would not be easy, but at least now he could see where it led. The traveler arrived as autumn painted the forest in shades of fire. Bjorn spotted him first, a figure stumbling through the trees, clutching a leather tube to his chest. The spirits had been restless all morning, their whispers carrying warnings of strange tidings, and now Bjorn understood why. "He carries news," Greta said, appearing beside him on the oak's wide branch. "And trouble!" She nodded toward the spirit bell, giving Bjorn permission to ring it. The sound scattered through the trees like bronze raindrops, calling their ethereal allies close. The traveler was an old skald, a wandering storyteller, his grey beard matted with blood from a fresh wound on his forehead. When Bjorn and Greta helped him into the treehouse, he clutched at their arms with desperate strength. "They're coming," he wheezed, fumbling with the leather tube. "The northern jarls. Grimulf has united them. They hunt for—" His eyes rolled toward Greta. "For the last of your kind." Inside the tube was a map, its surface marked with ink and blood. It showed the northern territories, once separate realms under different jarls, now merged into a single crimson stain that spread like a bloodstain across the parchment. At its heart was Grimulf's symbol, a crow devouring its own shadow. "He's grown stronger," the skald continued, accepting a cup of Greta's healing tea. "Found old weapons in ancient barrows, learned enough dark magic to twist men's minds. The jarls fell in line or fell to his blade." He coughed, and Bjorn saw blood on his lips. "But he fears the old ways, fears those who still keep them. He means to burn out every last trace of the ancient magic." Greta's fingers traced the map's markings, her expression grave. "These runes along the borders, their corruption of the old ways, blood magic, but twisted, forced." She glanced at Bjorn. "Like what you learned with your father's blade, but without respect or understanding." The skald nodded weakly. "He has raiders everywhere, searching for places of power. 3 nights ago, they found the stone circle near Raven's Ford. Nothing left now but broken rock and salted earth." His hands shook as he drew out a small pouch. "I saved what I could. Readings, warnings, marks of their passage. Been tracking their movements, trying to warn those who still remember the old ways." Bjorn spread the collected notes across Greta's table, piecing together the pattern of Grimulf's expansion. The twisted brooch at his throat seemed to grow heavier as he recognized places from his childhood. Villages and steadings now marked as conquered or destroyed. "He remembers you, boy," the skald said suddenly, his fever-bright eyes fixing on Bjorn. "Speaks of the one who got away, the last of the line he meant to end. Some say that's what drove him to seek the dark powers, the fear that you lived, that you might return." Greta's hand found Bjorn's shoulder, steady and strong. "He's right to fear," she said quietly, "but not for the reasons he thinks." She turned to tend to the skald's wounds, her movements deliberate and calm, despite the gravity of the news. "Rest now, friend. You've done your part in bringing us this warning." That night, unable to sleep, Bjorn studied the map by candlelight. The spirits clustered around him, their forms casting strange shadows on the parchment. The leaf child who had first welcomed him now wore autumn colors, and its touch left traces of gold on the map's surface, highlighting hidden paths through the wilderness. "They want to help," Greta said, emerging from the shadows. "The spirits. Remember when the northern lands were one realm, when jarls and witches worked together to maintain the balance?" She sat beside him, adding her own marks to the map, places where old magic still ran strong, where allies might be found. "I should have known this day would come," Bjorn said, touching the fragment of his father's sword that now hung at his belt. "Known that hiding and learning wouldn't be enough." "You weren't hiding," Greta corrected firmly. "You were becoming what you needed to be." She pointed to where Grimulf's territory met the forest's edge. "He has strength in numbers, in steel, and stolen magic. But he doesn't understand the power of the old ways, the true meaning of balance and sacrifice." The spirit bell rang softly of its own accord, and more forest beings gathered in the small room. Their presence made the candle flame dance, casting moving shadows across the map that seemed to suggest strategies and possibilities. "Your father's people and the forest folk were once allies," Greta continued. "Perhaps it's time to remind them of those ancient bonds." She smiled, though her eyes remained serious. "You've learned to walk between worlds, little bear. Now you must learn to unite them." Bjorn traced the path from their location to his old home, remembering the night he'd fled through the snow. He was no longer that frightened boy. The twisted brooch and reforged blade were proof of how much had changed, how much he had grown. Yet something of that night's terror still lived in his dreams, warning him of the cost of failure. "When do we begin?" he asked, knowing the answer, even as the words left his mouth. "We already have," Greta replied, as the spirits swirled around them like autumn leaves in a wind of change. "The forest has been preparing you for this since the night it guided you to my door. The only question is, are you ready to become what you were meant to be?" The map seemed to pulse in the candlelight, its markings shifting like the runes on his father's reforged blade. Bjorn thought of all he had learned, of the power that flowed through both steel and spell, of the balance between memory and hope. He was no longer just the son of a fallen chieftain, nor simply a witch's apprentice. He was something new, something that belonged to both worlds, and perhaps that was exactly what both worlds needed. The forging of the blade took 3 days and 3 nights. Greta had insisted it couldn't be rushed. Magic and metal both required patience, and this weapon would be unlike any forged before. The fragment of his father's sword formed the core, but around it they wound steel imbued with forest magic, metal that had been blessed by spirit song and tempered in sacred springs. "A warrior witch's blade," Greta explained as they worked, her hands moving in complex patterns over the forge. Not just a weapon, but a bridge between worlds. The spirits gathered to watch, their presence making the forge fire burn in strange colors. The leaf child scattered golden sparks across the metal as it took shape. Bjorn worked the bellows, singing the songs Greta had taught him, ancient melodies that spoke of balance and binding, of steel and spell woven together. His father's sword fragment seemed to sing back, its own memories becoming part of the new whole. The twisted brooch at his throat grew warm, resonating with the magic they worked. When the blade was finally complete, it was both beautiful and terrible to behold. Runes flickered along its length like living things, responding to Bjorn's touch. The pattern-welded steel showed hints of green and gold when it caught the light, as though the forest itself had been captured within the metal. "It will need blood to wake it properly," Greta said, her voice heavy with the weight of old knowledge. "Magic like this requires sacrifice." A horn blast cut through the evening air, followed by screams from the forest's edge. The spirits scattered like leaves in a storm, their agitation palpable. Bjorn's new blade hummed in his hands, sensing the approach of violence. "Bandits!" Greta spat after consulting with a returning spirit. "Taking advantage of the chaos Grimulf has spread, thinking the forest unprotected." Her eyes met Bjorn's. "It seems your blade will taste blood sooner than expected." They found the raiders at the forest's edge, a dozen men in mismatched armor terrorizing a group of travelers, merchants by their dress, probably seeking safer routes in these troubled times. The bandits had already killed 2 guards and were threatening worse. Bjorn felt an old familiar fear rise up, memories of that terrible night threatening to overwhelm him. But he was no longer that helpless child. The blade in his hands pulsed with power, and the spirits of the forest gathered around him like an invisible army. "Remember your training," Greta whispered. "Both kinds." Then she stepped back, leaving him to face this first real test alone. Bjorn emerged from the trees like a spirit himself, his blade catching the last light of day. The nearest bandit turned, surprise turning to fear as he sensed something otherworldly in the young warrior before him. The runes on Bjorn's sword flared to life, casting strange shadows across the clearing. The fight that followed was like a dance Bjorn had rehearsed all his life, but never performed. His blade moved with liquid grace, enhanced by the magic worked into its steel. When the first bandit's blood touched the runes, they blazed with blue fire. The forest itself seemed to respond, branches moving to trip his enemies, roots rising to tangle their feet. He spoke words of power as he fought, each spell enhancing his natural skill with the sword. A shield rune deflected a desperate axe blow. A swift rune let him move like wind through leaves. The spirits joined the battle in their own way, confusing and terrifying the bandits with ghostly touches and whispered threats. The raiders broke quickly, fleeing into the gathering darkness with screams of terror. Those who survived would carry stories of a warrior who wielded both blade and magic, of a forest that fought alongside him, stories that would eventually reach Grimulf's ears. In the aftermath, Bjorn knelt beside the fallen guards, while Greta tended to the surviving. Merchants. His blade had drawn blood, had proven itself in battle, but he felt no triumph, only a deep understanding of the responsibility he now carried. "You did well," Greta said later, as they walked back through the twilight forest. "You found the balance between mercy and justice, between power and restraint." She touched the sword at his side. "The blade has awakened now, bonded to your blood and purpose. It will serve you well in the battles to come." That night, Bjorn cleaned his new weapon with careful reverence, using clothes blessed with herbs and water from sacred springs. The runes still glowed faintly, but now they felt truly alive, connected to him in ways that went beyond mere ownership. This was no ordinary sword, just as he was no ordinary warrior. The spirits gathered in his room, their presence both congratulatory and solemn. The leaf child danced around the blade, leaving traces of autumn gold on its surface that merged with the existing patterns. Even the old ones, those ancient spirits who rarely showed themselves, manifested as distortions in the air, acknowledging what he had become. "A protector of two worlds," Greta said from the doorway, watching the spirits display. "That's what they're calling you now." She smiled, though her eyes held shadows of concern. "Word will spread of what happened today. Grimulf will hear of a warrior witch defending the forest's borders. Are you ready for what that means?" Bjorn thought of the merchants they'd saved, of how they'd looked at him with a mixture of fear and wonder. He thought of his father's teachings, about a warrior's duty, of Greta's lessons, about the balance of power and responsibility. The twisted brooch at his throat seemed to warm in response to his thoughts, a reminder of all that had been lost and all that might yet be saved. "I'm ready," he said, and felt the truth of it in his bones. His new blade hummed in agreement, its runes pulsing like a heartbeat. He was no longer caught between two worlds, but had become a bridge between them. Whatever battles lay ahead, he would face them as both warrior and witch, carrying the strength of steel and spell, of memory and magic. The wooden bowl was ancient beechwood, worn smooth by countless hands and darkened with age. Greta brought it out on the first night of the waning moon, when the stars burned cold and clear above the forest canopy. The spirits gathered close, their presence making the air thick with anticipation. "There are times when we must look beyond the forest's boundaries," she said, filling the bowl with water from a sacred spring. "Times when knowing becomes more important than waiting." Her fingers traced runes along the bowl's rim, making the water shimmer with an inner light. Bjorn recognized the gravity in her voice. Since his battle with the bandits 2 weeks ago, more travelers had come seeking shelter in the forest's edge. Each brought darker news. Villages burned, holy places desecrated, ancient stones toppled. Grimulf's shadow was spreading faster than anyone had expected. "Look," Greta commanded, dropping 3 leaves from the first oak into the glowing water. "See what the spirits see." The water's surface became like polished obsidian, reflecting more than just the starlight above. Bjorn saw armies on the move, their torches cutting through northern mists. Grimulf rode at their head, changed from Bjorn's memories but still recognizable. The bone braids in his beard had multiplied, each one carved with corrupt versions of the old runes. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, but it was wrong somehow, twisted and hungry. "He's learned too much, too quickly," Greta murmured, her reflection appearing beside Bjorn's in the bowl's surface. Knowledge without wisdom, power without understanding. The water rippled, showing scenes of Grimulf's men desecrating sacred groves, using blood-stained runes to bind unwilling spirits to their service. The visions shifted faster now, a great stone circle shattered by dark magic, its ancient guardians screaming as they were torn from their ancestral posts. Villages swearing allegiance to Grimulf's banner, their chief's eyes glazed with supernatural fear, and everywhere the burning of herbs and tokens that connected common folk to the old ways. He seeks to sever all bonds between our world and the spirit realm, Greta explained, her voice tight with anger, to gather all power to himself, to be the only bridge between the mundane and the magical. She gestured, and the water showed more detail of Grimulf's forces, warriors wearing armor marked with corrupted runes, weapons that drank blood and grew stronger with each kill. But it was the next vision that made Bjorn's heart turn to ice. He saw Grimulf standing in a familiar place, the burned ruins of his father's great hall. The warlord drove a staff of human bones into the scorched earth, speaking words that made reality itself shiver. The twisted brooch at Bjorn's throat grew cold as midwinter. "He's raising the dead," Bjorn whispered, understanding what he was. "Seeing the fallen warriors, my kin. He means to use them against us." Greta's face was grave in the bowl's reflection. "Worse. He seeks to bind their spirits before they can be reborn, to trap them in service to his will. It's an abomination against all natural law." The water darkened, as if the visions themselves recoiled from what they showed. The leaf-child spirit that had become Bjorn's frequent companion pressed close, its autumn gold form trembling with distress. Other spirits crowded around the bowl, their presence making the sacred water swirl with colors no mortal eye was meant to see. "The forest itself rejects what he's becoming," Greta continued. "Even the dark places, the old places that remember ancient blood feuds and forgotten wars, even they cry out against this perversion of the natural order." She passed her hand over the bowl, and the water showed paths of power running through the earth like golden veins. Everywhere Grimulf's forces passed, these lines grew dark and twisted. "How long?" Bjorn asked, his hand unconsciously gripping the hilt of his runed blade. The sword hummed with barely contained energy, responding to his rising emotion. The water's surface blazed suddenly with urgent clarity. Bjorn saw the moon's phases pass rapidly, saw leaves fall, and early snows dust the ground. 3 moons, Greta said softly. "By the first deep snow he'll be here, and he's not just coming for the forest's power now, he's coming for you." The vision shifted one final time, showing Bjorn himself through Grimulf's eyes, a figure of fear and prophecy, the lost son who might undo all the warlord's carefully laid plans. The water trembled, then went dark and still, the visions withdrawing like tide from shore. Greta sat back, her face lined with exhaustion. Scrying always took a toll, but tonight's visions had demanded more than usual. "We must prepare," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "Gather allies, strengthen the forest's wardings, teach you what remains to be taught." Bjorn stared into the now quiet bowl, seeing only his own reflection in the starlit water. He was no longer the boy who had fled into these woods, but neither was he yet ready to face what was coming. His blade caught the starlight, its runes pulsing with sympathetic power. "You've learned to be both warrior and witch," Greta said, reading his thoughts as she sometimes did. "Now you must learn to be a leader. Your father's people and the forest folk both will need guidance in the days ahead." She smiled, though her eyes remained serious. "The spirits didn't save you that night merely to make you my apprentice. They saw what you could become, a bridge between worlds in a time when the worlds themselves are in danger of being torn apart." The spirits swirled around them like leaves in an autumn wind, their presence both comforting and urgent. The leaf-child touched the surface of the water in the scrying bowl, and for a moment Bjorn saw a different vision, himself standing between Grimulf's army and the forest, his runed blade blazing with true power, the spirits of earth and tree. rising behind him like a storm of ancient memory. "We have work to do," he said finally, helping Greta rise. The twisted brooch at his throat had grown warm again, reminding him of all that had been lost and all that might yet be saved. The time for learning was ending. The time for action was near. The spirit drum was Greta's oldest possession, its wood taken from a lightning-struck oak in an age when gods still walked among men. Its surface was mapped with runes so ancient they made Bjorn's eyes blur, and when it spoke, even the eldest spirits listened. "Every guardian needs their call to arms," Greta said, lifting the drum from its resting place. "Every leader needs a way to rally those who would follow." She handed it to Bjorn with the gravity of passing on a crown. "The forest knows your heart now. Let's see if it will answer your call." They stood in a clearing as the day's last light painted the clouds in shades of flame. Bjorn held the drum before him, feeling the weight of centuries in his hands. His runed blade hung at his side, humming in harmony with the drum's quiet power. "Begin with the heartbeat of the forest," Greta instructed, "the rhythm the spirits taught you when you first learned to listen." Bjorn's first strikes were tentative, but the drum's voice was sure and strong. The sound rolled through the trees like summer thunder, each beat calling to something deep and ancient. The twisted brooch at his throat grew warm, adding its own melody to the song he played. They came slowly at first, the spirits he knew best. The leaf child danced in circles around him, its autumn colors blazing. Branch walkers emerged from the canopy, their shadowy forms more solid than he'd ever seen them. But as the drum's song grew stronger, others appeared. Ancient beings he'd only glimpsed in his years of training, powerful entities that rarely showed themselves to mortal eyes. "The forest remembers who you are," Greta said softly. "Both son of chiefs and child of magic, play them the song of your blood, of your purpose." Bjorn changed the rhythm, weaving in the war beats his father had taught him, the songs of battle and brotherhood that had once echoed in the great hall. The drum responded eagerly, its voice growing deeper, more urgent. The spirits moved like a tide around him, their forms shifting between battle-ready warriors and forces of nature. Then, carried on the drum's thunder, came something unexpected, human voices. From the forest's edge emerged figures Bjorn had thought lost forever, survivors of his father's clan, who had fled into other forests and hidden places after the raid. They approached cautiously, drawn by the drum's call, their eyes wide as they recognized the man their chieftain's son had become. Bjorn, an old warrior, stepped forward, his beard gray but his back still straight. "By the gods, you live! We thought..." When the hall burned, he stopped, overcome with emotion. "I was your father's shield, brother. We've been gathering others, waiting, watching Grimulf's rise, but we never dared hope." The drum song shifted again, responding to Bjorn's surging emotions. More clan members emerged from the shadows, some bearing weapons, others carrying the tools of their crafts. Among them, Bjorn recognized faces from his childhood. His cousin Astrid, now a woman grown, old Harold the smith, his arms still corded with muscle, even Saga the healer, who had helped bring him into the world. "The old alliances are remembered," Greta announced, her voice carrying to all assembled, spirit and human alike. "In times of greatest need, the blood of chiefs and the power of the forest can still be as one." She gestured to Bjorn. "Show them who you have become." Bjorn raised his runed blade, its surface catching the last sunlight. The sword's magic resonated with the drum's song, creating harmonies that spoke of both human courage and forest wisdom. The spirits swirled around him, no longer hiding their nature from the watching humans. "Grimulf comes," he declared, his voice stronger than he'd expected. "He brings corruption of the old ways, enslavement of free spirits, and desecration of all we hold sacred. He thinks to break the ancient bonds between our peoples." The drum beat steady beneath his words, like a heart pumping life through the gathering. But he forgot something important. He forgot that the forest remembers, that blood remembers, that magic remembers. The leaf child spirit darted forward, touching the drum with golden fingers. The resulting note rang through the clearing like a bell, and suddenly Bjorn could see the threads of connection running between all present, human and spirit, warrior and witch, past and future. "My father taught me the way of the sword," he continued, the drum picking up the pace of his words. "Greta taught me the way of magic, but you, all of you, taught me what it means to belong to something greater than myself." He looked around. The clearing, meeting eyes both human and otherworldly. "The forest sheltered me when I was lost. Now it's time to defend it, and in doing so, defend everything our ancestors built together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Warriors raised their weapons with shouts of allegiance. Spirits manifested their power in displays of natural force, trees bending, earth trembling, air singing with magic. The drum's voice rose to a crescendo, binding it all together in a symphony of shared purpose. Through the rest of that night, humans and spirits mingled in the clearing. Old stories were shared, ancient alliances renewed. The drum spoke occasionally of its own accord, marking moments of particular significance. Bjorn moved among them all, no longer feeling torn between two worlds, but finally understanding his role as a bridge between them. "This is only the beginning," Greta said, as midnight approached. "Grimulf's forces are many, and his dark power grows daily. But tonight," she smiled, watching as a group of young warriors listened intently to a branch walker's advice about moving unseen through dense forest. "Tonight, you've awakened something he cannot possibly match. The strength of true unity, freely given and deeply understood." The drum's final note of the evening was soft but clear, a promise of things to come. As the gathering slowly dispersed, humans to temporary camps at the forest's edge, spirits to their secret places among the trees, Bjorn felt a certainty he'd never known before. The twisted brooch at his throat no longer felt like just a reminder of loss, but also a symbol of renewal. They had much to do before Grimulf arrived, many preparations to make and skills to share. But tonight had shown him something crucial. He was no longer alone in his fight. The forest and his father's people would stand together as they had in days of old, and perhaps that ancient unity was exactly what the world needed to remember. The first attack came at dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the forest floor like a burial shroud. Grimulf's scouts, 24 hardened warriors marked with corrupted runes, thought to catch the forest's defenders unaware. Instead, they found themselves caught between blade and spell, between the visible world and the unseen. Bjorn felt the blood rune heat against his chest, where he'd carved it into a disc of ancient oak. The magic it contained was dangerous, demanding. Greta had warned him to use it only in direst need. "Blood magic answers to blood," she'd said. "It remembers every drop spent, every life taken. Use it wisely, or it will use you." Now, as steel clashed against steel in the pre-dawn gloom, he understood her warning. The rune pulled at him, hungry for the violence around it, eager to turn death into power. His runed blade sang in harmony with its darker sister, each drop of blood they spilled making both artifacts pulse with increasing strength. The battle moved like a dance through the morning mist. Bjorn's clan warriors fought alongside forest spirits, their movements coordinated by weeks of shared training. A branch walker would distract an enemy scout, leaving them open for a warrior's blade. The leaf child scattered golden sparks that blinded Grimulf's men at crucial moments. But it was the blood rune that turned the tide. When 3 enemy warriors cornered Bjorn against an ancient oak, he pressed his palm against the rune's surface, letting it taste his own freely given blood. Power surged through him like storm wind through winter branches. His runed blade blazed with crimson light, and for a moment he could see the threads of life itself running through his enemies. One cut was all it took, a single slash that carried both steel's edge and magic's bite. The corrupted runes on the enemy warrior's armor shattered, releasing the tortured spirits Grimulf had bound into them. The men fell, not just defeated, but cleansed, their faces showing a strange peace in death. In the battle's aftermath, Bjorn stared at the blood rune in his hand. Its surface was warm, satisfied, already eager for the next taste of warfare. The power it offered was intoxicating and terrifying. He understood now why Greta had been so hesitant to teach him its making, why she'd insisted on so many safeguards. And promises. "You used it well," she said, appearing beside him as the morning sun finally broke through the trees. "You didn't let it use you." She touched the rune briefly, her fingers tracing its complex patterns. "But remember, each time it drinks it will want more. Like Grimulf himself, it can be corrupted by too much hunger, too much death." Bjorn nodded, feeling the weight of both victory and warning. They had won this first skirmish, proved that their alliance of human and spirit could stand against Grimulf's corrupted forces. But the blood rune at his chest and the twisted brooch at his throat both reminded him of the cost of power, the fine line between use and abuse of the old magics. The forest itself seemed subdued in the wake of violence, its spirits drawing back too, their secret places to recover and reflect. Only the leaf child remained, sprinkling healing gold over the bloodied ground, helping life return to the battle-scarred earth. "We've shown them our strength," Bjorn said finally, cleaning his blade, with careful reverence. "But we've also shown them our methods. Grimulf will adapt, send worse next time." "Yes," Greta agreed, her eyes on the horizon where the sun painted the sky in shades of flame and blood. "The real battle is still to come. But now they know. The forest remembers how to fight back." The clan banner emerged from its hiding place like a ghost from memory, faded blue wool emblazoned with the silver bear of Bjorn's bloodline. Old Harold had preserved it through all the years of exile, keeping it wrapped in oiled leather and buried beneath a lightning-struck tree. Now it caught the evening breeze, its ancient symbols stirring to life in the fading light. "Your father carried this into his first battle," Harold said, his gnarled hands trembling slightly as he passed the banner to Bjorn. "And his father before him, back to the days when our people first claimed these lands." Danny, the old warrior's eyes grew distant. "We saved it that night when the hall burned. Seemed wrong somehow to let it die with everything else." Bjorn ran his fingers over the embroidered bear, feeling the magic worked into every stitch. His grandmother had sewn protection runes into the banner's border, hiding them in the traditional patterns. He could sense them now, with his witch-trained awareness. Old magic, family magic, different from but no less powerful than what Greta had taught him. The gathered clan warriors watched in silence as Bjorn lifted the banner. Many bore fresh scars from the morning's battle, proud wounds earned fighting alongside forest spirits against Grimulf's scouts. Yet Bjorn could sense their uncertainty, their struggle to reconcile the boy they'd known with the warrior witch he'd become. "You walk a strange path, young lord," said Sigrid, once his father's most trusted advisor. "Some whisper that too much. If forest magic might dim the warrior's fire in your blood." She stepped forward, her grey hair catching the last sunlight. "Yet I saw you fight today, saw how blade and spell worked as one in your hands." Bjorn planted the banner's staff firmly in the earth. The moment it touched the ground, the spirits stirred, especially the leaf child, which darted forward to dance around the ancient standard. To everyone's amazement, the faded blue fabric began to glow softly, the silver bear seeming to shift and move in the deepening dusk. "The old ways didn't distinguish between warrior and witch," Bjorn said, his voice carrying to all assembled. "Our ancestors knew that true strength flows from both sword arm and spirit song." He touched the twisted brooch at his throat, then the runed blade at his side. "Just as this forest sheltered me when I was lost, so did its magic help me become what our people need." The banner rippled in a wind that touched nothing else, its border runes glowing more distinctly now. The leaf child's golden light revealed what Bjorn's grandmother had hidden in the patterns, ancient symbols of unity between human and forest kind, worked in secret by generations of clan women who remembered what their men had forgotten. "Tomorrow we begin training together," Bjorn announced. "Warriors and spirits, steel and spell. Grimulf thinks to break us by corrupting the old magic, but he forgets." He gripped the banner staff tighter, feeling power pulse through the wood. "He forgets that true magic lives in the connections between all things, in the trust between shield brothers, in the memories passed down through generations, in the promises we keep to each other and to this land. The gathered warriors struck their weapons against their shields in approval. Even the most doubtful among them could not deny what they'd seen in battle, how the forest itself had fought beside them, how Bjorn's combination of blade work and spellcraft had shattered Grimulf's corrupted runes. As night fell fully, Bjorn watched his father's old guard gather around cookfires with forest spirits drifting at the edge of light. The banner stood between worlds, its silver bear catching. Starlight and spirit glow alike. Tomorrow would bring more training, more preparation for the battles ahead. But tonight, watching human and spirit draw closer together under the ancient symbol of his line, Bjorn felt a deep certainty that they were walking the right path. The banner marked more than just a clan's territory now. It stood as a symbol of remembrance and renewal, of old wounds healed and ancient bonds reforged. In its shadow, warrior and witch, human and spirit, past and future, all could find common ground. The spirit crown materialized the morning of the battle, woven from living branches and autumn leaves by the forest itself. The leaf child brought it to Bjorn as dawn's first light filtered through the mist, its golden touch transforming simple wood into something ancient and terrible. As he placed it upon his head, Bjorn felt the forest's power surge through him like spring flood through winter ice. Grimulf's main force arrived with the rising sun, 300 warriors strong, their armor marked with corrupted runes that pulsed with stolen power. At their head rode the warlord himself, changed from Bjorn's memories into something darker. The bone braids in his beard clicked together like angry teeth, and his eyes burned with unnatural fire. "So," Grimulf's voice boomed across the clearing, "the lost cub returns with forest tricks and spirit friends." His gaze fixed on the spirit crown. "Pretty baubles won't save you, boy. I've learned real power while you played with leaves and shadows." Bjorn stood at the forest's edge, the clan banner rising behind him, his runed blade glowing with inner light. The spirit crown pulsed in time with his heartbeat, connecting him to every tree, every spirit, every warrior who stood with him. Through its power, he could feel the web of life that bound all things together, and could sense how Grimulf's corrupted magic tore at those sacred bonds. The battle began with thunder, both natural and magical. Grimulf's forces charged forward, their weapons drinking light from the morning sun. But the forest was ready. Trees bent and swayed, their branches becoming barriers and weapons. The ground itself rippled, roots rising to tangle hostile feet. Spirit song merged with war cries as Bjorn's combined forces met the enemy's charge. Through the spirit crown's enhanced awareness, Bjorn directed the battle like a conductor, leading a deadly symphony. Here, he sent branch walkers to hamper enemy archers. There, he guided his father's old guard to strike at weak points in the enemy line. The leaf child darted through the chaos, its golden touch blinding Grimulf's warriors at crucial moments. But Grimulf's corrupted magic was strong. Black lightning tore through spirit barriers, and hooks of dark power tried to snare and bind the forest's defenders. The warlord had learned much in the years of Bjorn's exile, had twisted the old ways into weapons of domination and death. The spirit crown burned against Bjorn's brow as he fought his way toward his ancient enemy. His runed blade sang with each stroke, breaking corrupt spells and severing the bonds that held tortured spirits in Grimulf's service. The twisted brooch at his throat grew hot, remembering that night of fire and loss. The two leaders met in a clash of opposed magics. Grimulf's corrupt power struck at Bjorn like a poisoned blade, seeking to overwhelm and bind. But the spirit crown flared with the forest's own life force, turning death magic back upon itself. Their weapons met in shower of natural and unnatural energies. "You're fighting the tide of time, boy," Grimulf snarled as they struggled. "The old ways are dying. Better to take power than waste time with balance and harmony. The old ways." "Remember," Bjorn answered, feeling the spirit crown pulse with the truth of his words. "And so do I. The battle hung in balance until Bjorn understood what the crown was trying to tell him. Victory wouldn't come through greater power, but through deeper connection. As Grimulf gathered his corrupt energies for a final strike, Bjorn opened himself fully to the forest's touch. The spirit crown blazed like a star of living gold. The forest rose with him. Every tree, every spirit, every blade of grass added its strength to his. The web of life itself rejected Grimulf's corruption, and for a moment through the crown's power, Bjorn let his enemy feel the truth of what he fought against. Grimulf's forces broke before this display of united power. The warlord himself retreated, his dark magic scattered by the forest's fury. But as Bjorn watched them flee, the spirit crown showed him darker visions, hints of greater corruption to come, of prices yet to be paid. They had won the day, but at great cost. Many warriors lay wounded or dead, parts of the forest had been scarred by corrupt magic, and Grimulf, though driven back, was not defeated. The spirit crown's weight reminded Bjorn that leadership, like magic, demanded balance between victory and responsibility, between power and restraint. The sacrifice stone stood in the heart of the forest's oldest grove, its surface carved with runes so ancient they predated written memory. Dark stains marked its weathered face, the accumulated weight of centuries of magical debt paid in blood and power. Greta had brought Bjorn here only once before, warning him that such places demanded respect. Magic always has its price, she had said. The stone ensures it's paid fairly. Now 3 days after the great battle, Bjorn watched his mentor bleed against that same stone. The victory had cost more than just warriors' lives. It had torn something fundamental in the fabric of forest magic itself. Someone had to restore the balance. Greta had chosen to pay that price. "Don't waste your grief, little bear," she said, using his mother's old endearment one last time. Her hand pressed against the stone's surface, her blood tracing the paths of ancient runes. "This was always going to be my final lesson to you." The leaf child hovered nearby, its usual golden glow dimmed to autumn amber. Other spirits gathered. In the shadows between trees, their forms more substantial than usual, as if the proximity to such deep magic made them nearly solid. They had come to witness the passing of the last forest witch, and the rise of her successor, the forests. "Power isn't free," Greta continued, her voice growing weaker as the stone drank deeper. "When we called on its full strength against Grimulf, we created a debt. Balance must be maintained." She smiled, though pain lined her face. "Better my old blood than your young life." Bjorn's hands clenched around his runed blade. "There must be another way. Let me share the cost." "No." Greta's voice cracked like winter ice. "Your path leads forward. Mine." She pressed harder against the stone, and ancient magic flared between her fingers. "Mine ends here, completing the circle. Teaching you was my final task. Protecting you, my final duty." The twisted brooch at Bjorn's throat grew warm, remembering another sacrifice made in love. His mother had given her life to help him escape the burning hall. Now Greta offered hers to secure his future. The weight of such gifts threatened to break him. "Listen closely," Greta whispered as the stone's power drew her closer. "Grimulf will return, stronger for this defeat. He'll try to raise the dead against us, your kin, the fallen warriors. When that day comes," her eyes locked with his, bright with fading fire, "remember that love's sacrifice carries power dark. Magic can never match." The sacrifice stone began to glow with a deep red light. Greta's blood had traced all the ancient patterns, awakening magics that had slept for generations. The very air seemed to hold its breath as power gathered. "Your father taught you strength," Greta said, her voice barely audible now. "I taught you magic, but the greatest power—" Her free hand caught his, pressing something small and hard into his palm. "The greatest power lies in knowing when to let go." The stone flared blindingly bright. When Bjorn could see again, Greta was gone. Only her staff remained, leaning against the ancient rock. In his hand lay her most precious possession, a single stone from the first oak, carved with runes of protection and renewal. The leaf child drifted forward, touching the spot where Greta had stood. Golden light spread across the stone's surface, transforming the blood marks into shimmering symbols of power and promise. Other spirits joined in, each adding their essence to the magic being worked. Bjorn felt the change ripple through the forest, wounds healing, balances restoring, broken, things mending. Greta's sacrifice had paid not just the debt of their victory, but had renewed the very foundations of forest magic. She had turned her ending into the beginning of something greater. The sacrifice stone stood silent now, its surface clean, but its power forever changed by the blood of the last forest witch. Bjorn lifted Greta's staff, feeling its weight settle into his grip like a passing of inheritance. The leaf child crowned it with a wreath of golden light, acknowledging him as the forest's new guardian. The price had been paid, the balance was restored, but as Bjorn stood in that ancient grove, surrounded by the spirits of two worlds, he understood that the greatest sacrifice was yet to come. The memory crystal caught the firelight like frozen tears, its faceted surface reflecting more than just flame. Greta's final gift to Bjorn had seemed simple at first, a clear stone no larger than a child's palm. But as he sat in her now empty treehouse, cradling the crystal in hands that still felt the phantom warmth of her goodbye, he began to understand its true nature. "When you're ready to understand," her voice whispered from the crystal's depths, "when you're ready to see the whole truth of what we face." The crystal pulsed with stored magic, with memories waiting to be unveiled. The leaf child, perched on his shoulder, its golden glow mingling with the crystal's inner light. Other spirits gathered close, drawn by the power of revelation about to be unleashed. Bjorn took a deep breath, touched the twisted brooch at his throat for courage, and opened himself to the crystal's wisdom. The world dissolved into memory, not just Greta's, but the forest's own remembrance of things long past. He saw Grimulf as a young warrior, proud and strong, seeking knowledge of the old ways. Saw him turned away by those who guarded ancient secrets, saw rejection curdle into bitter resolve. "Power responds to will," Grimulf had declared, standing before the ruins of his first conquered holy site. "If they won't share their magic, I'll take it." The crystal's vision showed how he had tortured, captured spirits for their secrets, had corrupted sacred runes to serve his purposes, had slowly built his dark understanding on a foundation of broken oaths and stolen power. But deeper memories waited. Bjorn saw his own father and Grimulf as young men, blood brothers once, before ambition and fear drove them apart. Saw how his father had tried to maintain the old balance, to keep faith with both human ways and forest magic. Saw how this middle path had earned him enemies among those who wanted to choose one world over the other. "Your father understood what few remember," Greta's voice explained through the crystal. "The old ways weren't about choosing between warrior and witch, between human and spirit. They were about maintaining the bridge between worlds, about being strong enough to walk both paths." The crystal darkened, showing the night of the halls burning from new angles. Bjorn watched Grimulf's face as he ordered the attack, saw not just hatred there, but fear. Fear of what Bjorn's father had represented. Fear of a power that couldn't be conquered or controlled, only earned through respect and balance. "He fears you more than he ever feared your father," Greta's voice continued, "because in you, the bridge between worlds grows stronger than ever. You're what he could have been, had he chosen wisdom over power, understanding over dominance." Final visions flickered through the crystal, glimpses of possible futures. In one, Grimulf stood triumphant over a dead forest, its spirits bound. In chains of corrupted magic, in another, battle raged beneath winter skies, the dead rising to fight the living. But there were other possibilities too, harder to see but burning with hope's fragile light. "The crystal shows truth," Greta explained, "but truth has many faces. The future is not set, little bear. It waits to be shaped by choices yet unmade, by sacrifices yet unoffered." Her voice grew softer, heavy with final wisdom. Remember, Grimulf's greatest weapon is not his stolen power, but his ability to make others doubt the worth of walking between worlds, to make them choose one path, at the expense of all others. The crystal's light faded, leaving Bjorn alone with this understanding. He sat quietly, absorbing all he had seen, all he had learned. The twisted brooch at his throat seemed to pulse in time with his thoughts, remembering old pain while acknowledging new purpose. The leaf child touched the crystal with golden fingers, making it spark one final time. In that brief flash, Bjorn caught a glimpse of himself as the forest saw him. Not just a warrior, not just a witch, but a bridge between worlds. A keeper of balance in an age that had forgotten its worth. He understood now what had to be done. The final battle would not be won by power alone, but by remembering what Grimulf had forgotten. That true strength lies not in domination, but in the courage to stand between opposing forces and hold them in harmony. The unity ring blazed on Bjorn's finger like a star fallen to earth, forged from his father's sword pommel and blessed by forest magic. Snow fell thick around the burned ruins of the Great Hall as Grimulf's army approached, their corrupt banners dark against the winter sky. Behind Bjorn, the forest gathered its power, spirits and warriors alike preparing for the final confrontation. The dead came first. Grimulf had kept his dark promise, raising fallen warriors from their rest. Among them, Bjorn recognized faces from that terrible night, his uncle, his cousin Eric, even warriors who had died in today's early skirmishes. Their eyes burned with captive spirits, bound by Grimulf's twisted magic. "Watch, little cub," Grimulf called from atop his night-black horse. "Watch your own blood turn against you." The bone braids in his beard clattered like chains as he raised his staff of human bones. "Everything you love becomes a weapon in my hands." The unity ring pulsed with answering power. Through it, Bjorn could feel the connections between all things, the bonds of blood and brotherhood, the ties between spirit and flesh, the ancient pacts between human and forest. Most importantly, he could sense the trapped souls of his kinsmen, could feel their rage at being used this way. "They aren't yours to command," Bjorn declared, his voice carrying on winter wind. His runed blade caught the grey light, its symbols awakening to his need. The twisted brooch at his throat grew warm, remembering other sacrifices made on this blood-soaked ground. The battle erupted like a storm breaking. Dead warriors charged forward, their weapons ghostly in the winter light. But Bjorn was ready. The unity ring flared as he brought his blade up, its power flowing through him into the runed steel. Where his sword struck, corrupt magic shattered. The trapped spirits of his kinsmen broke free, turning on their dark master with centuries of bottled rage. Grimulf's living warriors charged next, their armor marked with stolen power. But the forest was ready for them, trees bent like living warriors, their branches becoming spears and shields. Spirits manifested in forms terrible and beautiful, the leaf child leading a host of its kind in blinding swarms, while ancient powers, long dormant, rose from the earth itself. Through it all, Bjorn fought his way toward Grimulf. The unity ring showed him the truth of what his enemy had become, a hollow thing, emptied of everything but hunger for power. The warlord's magic was strong, but it was strength, built on breaking things, on forcing submission. It couldn't match the power that came from freely given alliance, from bonds forged in trust and sacrifice. They met in the heart of the ruined hall, where the high seat had once stood. Grimulf's staff clashed against Bjorn's blade in a shower of opposing magics. Dark lightning met forest fire, corruption faced growth, domination struggled against unity. "You're a fool," Grimulf snarled as they fought. "Trying to bridge worlds that were meant to be separate. Power is power. It must be taken, controlled." The unity ring blazed in answer, showing Bjorn the cost of Grimulf's path, the broken spirits, the severed connections, the lonely darkness of a world where nothing was freely given. Through the ring's power, he forced his enemy to see it too. "This is what you forgot," Bjorn said, pressing forward. "The old ways weren't about controlling power. The ring pulsed with each word, its light spreading across the battlefield. They were about maintaining balance, about being strong enough to stand between forces and hold them in harmony. The final blow wasn't struck with steel or spell, but with understanding. The unity ring gathered power from every bond on the battlefield, from warriors fighting side by side, from spirits dancing between worlds, from the very land itself, remembering ancient pacts. Through Bjorn, it offered Grimulf one last chance at redemption. For a moment, just a moment, something human flickered in the warlord's eyes. Then his staff of bones struck out, seeking to corrupt the ring's pure power. But some forces cannot be stolen or subdued. The unity ring flared like a newborn sun, and in its light all dark magic burned away. Grimulf fell, not just defeated, but transformed. The corrupt runes crumbled from his armor. The bone braids fell from his beard like autumn leaves. What remained was just a man, old, tired, and finally free of the darkness he had embraced. Spring came early to the ruins of the great hall. Where blood had soaked the winter snow, green shoots now pushed through dark earth. Among them, Bjorn planted Greta's staff, not as a marker of death, but as a promise of renewal. The old wood, which had channeled so much power over the years, took root almost immediately. Fresh leaves sprouted from its ancient surface, each one carved with naturally forming runes. The seedling staff, the spirits called it now. Where it stood, the boundary between worlds grew thin. The leaf child danced around it daily, sprinkling golden light that helped heal the battle-scarred ground. Other spirits came too, drawn by the staff's promise of new beginnings and restored balance. Life returns, even to places of greatest loss, Bjorn said to the gathered clan members and forest spirits. The twisted brooch still hung at his throat, but its surface had been smoothed by time and touch, its shape transformed like everything else. We rebuild, but not to forget. We rebuild to remember differently. The unity ring still shone on his finger, though its power had gentled since the final battle. Through it, he could feel the threads of connection growing stronger each day, between his father's people and the forest folk, between the visible world and the unseen. Even those who had once followed Grimulf found their way here, seeking to understand the old ways properly this time. Grimulf himself was gone, not dead, but transformed. The last anyone had seen him, he had walked into the deep forest, his eyes finally clear of darkness. The spirits watched him go, neither hindering nor helping. Some paths of redemption must be walked alone. The seedling staff grew quickly, its branches reaching toward sky and earth alike. Those with the wisdom to look closely could see how its growth patterns formed new runes, symbols of healing, of balance, of bridges between worlds. Under its spreading canopy, Bjorn held counsel with both human and spirit leaders, maintaining the delicate balance his position required. Your father would be proud, old Harold said one evening, watching young warriors train alongside forest spirits in the staff's shadow. Not just of the battles won, but of the peace you've built after. Bjorn touched the staff's living bark, feeling the pulse of magic flowing through it like sap. This was Greta's final lesson, he realized, that true power lay not in the ability to destroy or dominate, but in the strength to nurture growth, to maintain harmony between opposing forces. The leaf child landed on his shoulder, its golden light mixing with the staff's green glow. Through the unity ring, Bjorn could sense its contentment, its joy in seeing the worlds it loved growing back together. Other spirits gathered as dusk approached, their forms more solid than they had been in generations. The veil between worlds was healing, restored by freely given trust and mutual understanding. As night fell, the seedling staff began its evening song, a subtle harmony of creaking wood and whispering leaves that spoke of balance restored and old wounds healed. The twisted brooch at Bjorn's throat hummed in harmony, its own transformation complete. He was no longer caught between worlds, but had become a living bridge between them, just as the staff was both separator and connector, both boundary and gateway. Under stars that shone on both seen and unseen realms, Bjorn stood between his father's hall and Greta's forest. The seedling staff rose behind him like a new kind of throne, not a seat of power, but a reminder of the responsibility that came with standing between worlds. Spring wind carried the scent of growth and renewal, promising that even the deepest winters eventually yield to new life. The forest crown was nothing like the crown Bjorn's father had worn in the great hall, where that had been gold and iron. This was woven of living branches and eternal leaves, blessed by both human hand and spirit touch. It rested lightly on his brow as he stood before the gathered assembly, clan warriors and forest spirits, old enemies and new allies, all united under the spreading branches of the seedling staff. 10 years had passed since the final battle. The ruins of the great hall had been rebuilt, but not as before. Now the walls incorporated living trees, their branches forming rafters that welcomed both human and spirit folk. The unity ring still shone on Bjorn's finger, its power a constant reminder of the bonds that held his world together. "We gather to remember," he began, his voice carrying to all present. The leaf child, now grown to a magnificent spirit of summer gold, danced above the assembly, casting light that bridged seen and unseen realms. Not just the victories and losses that brought us here, but the truth those battles taught us. The twisted brooch still hung at his throat, transformed by time and magic into something beautiful, its surface now mapped with naturally formed runes that echoed those on the forest crown. Like him, it had become a symbol of how broken things could be remade into bridges between worlds. The old ways were never about choosing between warrior and witch, between human craft and forest magic. He touched the crown, feeling how it connected him to every being present. They were about finding the strength to stand between forces, to maintain balance not through dominance, but through understanding. Around him, the evidence of this truth was clear. Young warriors trained in both blade work and spirit song, guided by teachers from both worlds. The forest itself had grown stronger, its boundaries no longer walls but gateways between realms. Even those who had once followed Grimulf's dark path had found their way to this new balance, learning to work with power rather than trying to control it. The forest crown glowed softly as Bjorn completed the renewal of ancient pacts. Such ceremonies were needed now and then, not to enforce bonds, but to celebrate them. Through the crown's power, he could feel the web of connections that held his world together, each thread strengthened by choice and trust, rather than force or fear. "My father taught me the way of the sword," he said, remembering. "Greta taught me the way of magic, but you, all of you, taught me that true strength lies in bringing different powers together, in finding harmony between opposing forces." As if in answer, the seedling staff burst into bloom behind him, unseasonable flowers carrying the scent of both forest magic and human hope. The spirits swirled in joyous dance, their forms more solid than they had been in centuries. The veil between worlds had grown thin through trust, allowing both realms to strengthen each other. The forest crown settled more firmly on his brow, acknowledging his role not as ruler, but as guardian of this hard-won balance. Through it, Bjorn could sense the future taking root like a mighty tree, its branches reaching toward endless possibilities, its roots anchored in the wisdom of two worlds united. Under that living crown, between the realm of steel and the realm of spirit, Bjorn had finally found his true inheritance, not just his father's warrior strength or Greta's witch wisdom, but the power that came from walking between worlds and helping others find their own path across that bridge. The leaf child settled on his shoulder, its golden light mixing with the crown's glow. Together they faced the future, knowing that some boundaries were meant not to separate, but to bring different worlds together.